Once upon a time, in the grand and gilded halls of Europe, kings and queens found themselves with a lot of time on their hands. Ruling a country, after all, was mostly about waiting for other people to finish talking or for someone to invent the telephone. So what did royalty do to pass those endless hours? Well, let's just say their hobbies were not exactly the stuff of legend. Take King George V of England, for example. While his ancestors were busy conquering new lands and fighting off invaders, George was collecting stamps. Yes, stamps. The king's stamp collection was so vast and so meticulously organized that it was said he could spot a misplaced penny read from across the room. His family, meanwhile, tried to look interested as he explained the difference between a plate 77 and a plate 73. One can only imagine the excitement at royal dinner parties. And now, if you'll all gather round, I'll show you my latest acquisition from the British Guyana series.
But George was hardly alone. Queen Victoria herself was known for her love of journaling. Not the dramatic tell-all kind, but the sort where you write down what you had for breakfast and whether it rained. Her diaries, stretching over 60 million words, included thrilling entries like ate toast, walked in garden, dog barked. Historians have spent years poring over these volumes, searching for scandal, only to find a detailed weather report. Meanwhile, over in France, King Louis XVI had a passion for locksmithing. That's right. The King of France, with an entire palace at his disposal, spent his free time fiddling with tiny metal parts and making keys. His fascination with locks was so well known that courtiers would bring him broken padlocks just to keep him busy. It's said that during the French Revolution, as the mob stormed the gates, Louis was found in his workshop trying to fix a particularly stubborn lock. Perhaps if he'd spent more time on politics and less on padlocks, history might have turned out differently. Then there was Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, who enjoyed wait-for-it photography. Not the action-packed kind with wild animals or daring adventures, but mostly blurry photos of his family standing very still. The royal photo albums are filled with page after page of the same faces in the same garden, wearing the same slightly uncomfortable smiles. It's no wonder the Russian court was famous for its long, silent afternoons. Across the channel, Queen Mary of Teck, wife of George V, took up the thrilling art of needlepoint. She would spend hours embroidering cushions, handkerchiefs, and anything else that would sit still long enough. Her handiwork can still be seen in various royal residences, often admired by visitors who have no idea what they're looking at. Ah yes, this is the famous cushion of 1923. Note the exquisite depiction of it might be a flower, or perhaps a very small lion. Meanwhile, Emperor Hirohito of Japan was an avid marine biologist. He spent countless hours classifying sea creatures, writing detailed notes about jellyfish, and occasionally naming a new species after himself. His court was filled with tanks of mysterious aquatic life, and visiting dignitaries were often treated to long lectures about the eating habits of sea cucumbers. Fascinating, they would murmur, desperately hoping for a tea break. Let's not forget King Charles VI of France, who was famous for his love of playing cards. Unfortunately, he was also convinced he was made of glass and might shatter at any moment, which made shuffling the deck a bit of a challenge. His courtiers had to invent special, extra-soft playing cards, and games would often be interrupted by the king's anxious requests for more cushions. Over in Austria, Emperor Franz Joseph had a passion for clockmaking. He would spend hours tinkering with gears and springs, determined to create the perfect timepiece. His palace was filled with clocks, all ticking at slightly different times, making it nearly impossible to know when dinner would be served. Guests would wander the halls, listening for the chime that meant it was finally time to eat. And then there was Queen Alexandra, wife of Edward VII, who adored collecting miniature porcelain dogs. Her collection grew so large that entire rooms were dedicated to tiny ceramic canines, each with its own name and backstory. Visitors would be given tours of the dog rooms, where they were expected to admire the latest addition. This one is called Sir Barkington. He's from Dresden. Isn't he magnificent? Even the mighty Emperor Akbar of India had a surprisingly quiet hobby pigeon racing. He kept hundreds of pigeons, each carefully trained and pampered, and would spend afternoons watching them fly in circles. The royal court would gather to cheer on their favorite birds, though it was sometimes hard to tell who was winning. And there goes Blue Wing, followed closely by Fluffy. Wait, no, Fluffy has landed on the roof. Never mind. Finally, we have King Gustav III of Sweden, who was obsessed with coffee. Not drinking it, but experimenting with it. He famously ordered a scientific study to determine whether coffee or tea was more harmful, forcing 2 prisoners to drink each beverage for life. The experiment was so slow and uneventful that both prisoners outlived the doctors conducting the study.
So what do all these hobbies have in common? They were, by royal standards, spectacularly boring. And yet in their own way, they offer a glimpse into the quieter side of history, a world of stamps, locks and porcelain dogs, where the greatest excitement was a new entry in the diary or a particularly successful embroidery. If you ever find yourself yawning at your own hobbies, just remember you're in very royal company. But let's not stop there, because the world of royal hobbies is a bottomless well of gentle absurdity. Take the Habsburgs, for example. This famously inbred dynasty ruled over a patchwork of European lands for centuries, and in between all the royal marriages and treaties, they found time for a truly riveting pastime genealogy. Yes, the Habsburgs loved nothing more than drawing up enormous family trees tracing their lineage back to Charlemagne Julius Caesar. And if you asked them after a few glasses of wine, probably Adam and Eve. Family gatherings must have been a real hoot. Look, Cousin Leopold, I've discovered we're related to ourselves again.
Meanwhile, in Prussia, King Frederick William I was obsessed with collecting tall soldiers. Not just any soldiers, only the tallest, most statuesque men in the kingdom would do. He would send scouts far and wide, offering rewards for anyone over 6 feet tall. The result? A personal regiment of giants known as the Potsdam Grenadiers, who spent most of their days standing around looking impressive and occasionally being measured with a very large ruler. The king would sometimes dress them up and march them around the palace for his own amusement, like the world's most awkward fashion show. Let's cross the channel to England again, where Queen Anne found solace in wait-for-it playing cards. But not just any cards. Queen Anne was a stickler for rules, and she would spend hours debating the finer points of whist and piquet, sometimes rewriting the rulebook, just to keep things interesting. Her courtiers quickly learned that the quickest way to royal favour was to lose gracefully, preferably while complimenting her shuffling technique. Over in Spain, King Alfonso XIII was a passionate pigeon fancier. His palace gardens were filled with dovecotes, and he could often be found chatting with his favourite birds, who, to their credit, listened politely and never interrupted. The royal staff became experts at cleaning up after the feathered guests, and foreign dignitaries were sometimes presented with a pigeon as a token of royal esteem. Nothing says welcome to Spain quite like a bird in a box. Let's not forget Empress Elizabeth of Austria, better known as Sisi, who took personal grooming to an Olympic level. Her daily beauty routine could last up to 3 hours, involving elaborate hairstyles, facial massages, and the occasional raw veal face mask. Her hairdresser was paid a royal salary and lived in constant fear of dropping a hairpin. Sisi's obsession with her appearance was legendary, and her beauty secrets were guarded more closely than the crown jewels. Meanwhile, in Denmark, King Christian VII developed a fondness for puppet shows. Not just watching them, he insisted on performing every role himself, complete with voices and improvised dialogue. The royal court would gather for these performances, applauding politely as the king acted out dramatic tales of heroic sock puppets and villainous mittens. It's said that the Prime Minister once had to sit through a 3-hour epic about a lost button. Back in England, Queen Charlotte, wife of George III, had a passion for botany. She would spend hours in her gardens cataloguing plants and talking to her favourite flowers. Her letters to friends were filled with detailed descriptions of her latest botanical discoveries, often accompanied by pressed leaves and sketches. The royal gardeners learned to tread carefully lest they accidentally uproot one of the Queen's prized petunias. In Sweden, King Carl XVI and Gustav took up the thrilling hobby of bird-watching. He would rise at dawn, binoculars in hand, to spot the elusive Swedish warbler. His enthusiasm was infectious, and soon the entire royal household was pressed into service as amateur ornithologists, recording the comings and goings of every sparrow and finch. Royal decrees were sometimes delayed because the king was busy tracking a particularly chatty magpie. Over in Portugal, Queen Maria II was an avid knitter. She produced endless scarves, socks and shawls, many of which were gifted to visiting dignitaries who had to feign delight at receiving yet another woolen masterpiece. The royal palace was rumoured to have an entire wing dedicated to storing her creations, with piles of colourful yarn stacked to the ceiling. And finally, in the Netherlands, Queen Wilhelmina became fascinated by specifically painting cows. Her canvases were filled with serene bovine portraits, each cow rendered with loving detail. Art critics were baffled, but the Queen was undeterred, insisting that every cow had its own unique personality. Her paintings are still displayed in Dutch museums today, often in the miscellaneous section. So the next time you find yourself bored with your own hobbies, remember even the world's most powerful people spent their free time knitting, birdwatching, or debating the finer points of whist. If it's good enough for royalty, it's good enough for the rest of us. Let's keep wandering through the royal halls of history, where hobbies were sometimes so dull that even the palace mice nodded off. Take King Ferdinand IV of Bulgaria, whose passion was botany. Not just any botany, but the careful crossbreeding of rare plants in the royal greenhouse. He would spend hours talking to his orchids, giving them names, and according to palace gossip, reading them poetry. Visiting diplomats were sometimes given guided tours of the greenhouse, where they'd be politely forced to admire a particularly shy fern or a cactus with a royal title. This is Sir Spiky III, a fine specimen, don't you think? Even the most seasoned ambassadors struggled to keep a straight face. Meanwhile, in Belgium, King Leopold II was obsessed with model trains. His private rooms were filled with elaborate tracks, tiny stations, and miniature passengers. He would spend afternoons meticulously rearranging the scenery, adding new tunnels, or repainting a tiny ticket booth. The royal staff quickly learned to tiptoe around the train room lest they derail the king's latest masterpiece. Rumour had it that he once postponed a cabinet meeting because his miniature locomotive had derailed at the tiny replica of Brussels Central. Let's not forget Queen Margrethe II of Denmark, who in addition to ruling a country is a passionate illustrator and costume designer. She has spent decades creating whimsical illustrations for books and designing costumes for theatre productions. Her sketches often feature slightly bewildered animals and royals in elaborate hats. When she's not busy with official duties, she can be found hunched over her drawing table, lost in a world of ink and imagination. Royal aides have learned to recognize the Do Not Disturb sign, a trail of colored pencils leading to the Queen's studio. Over in Norway, King Harald V is a devoted sailor. He spends his free time meticulously polishing his boat and planning voyages along the Norwegian coast. He's so dedicated to the hobby that he once competed in the Olympics as a yachtsman. The royal family's summer holidays are filled with gentle maritime adventures with the king at the helm and everyone else bundled in raincoats, bracing for another thrilling afternoon of watching the fjords go by at a stately pace. It's said that the royal corgi gets seasick just hearing the word regatta. Back in Britain, Prince Albert, husband of Queen Victoria, was a pioneer in the world of plumbing. He took a keen interest in the palace's water systems, overseeing the installation of the latest pipes and flush toilets. Dinner conversations at Buckingham Palace sometimes veered into detailed discussions of water pressure and drainage angles, much to the confusion of foreign guests. Yes, Your Highness, the new cistern is truly a marvel. May I have another roll, please? Meanwhile, in Monaco, Prince Rainier III became fascinated by stamp collecting, following in the footsteps of King George V. His collection grew so large that it required its own wing in the palace, and he would host stamp viewing parties for anyone willing to feign interest in a particularly rare airmail issue. Princess Grace, ever the supportive spouse, would smile politely and ask questions like, "So why is this stamp upside down?" Let's cross the globe to Thailand, where King Bhumibol Adulyadej was a passionate jazz musician. He played the saxophone and composed his own pieces, sometimes performing for the royal household. His music was gentle, soothing, and according to palace insiders, occasionally put the royal dogs to sleep. State banquets sometimes ended with impromptu jam sessions featuring the king on sax and a rotating cast of slightly bewildered courtiers on maracas. In the Netherlands, King Willem-Alexander has a soft spot for ice skating. Every winter, he dons his skates and joins the masses on the frozen canals, gliding serenely past windmills and bridges. The royal family's annual skating day is a highlight of the Dutch calendar, with the king leading the way and everyone else trying not to fall over. It's a gentle, wholesome tradition, unless someone forgets to check the thickness of the ice. Back in Spain, Queen Sofia is a dedicated amateur archaeologist. She spends her holidays carefully brushing dirt off ancient pottery shards and cataloguing her finds. The royal family's summer vacations often involve long days at dusty dig sites, with the Queen happily sifting through gravel while the rest of the family searches for shade. Her greatest discovery to date, a perfectly preserved Roman coin which she keeps in a velvet-lined box next to her collection of interesting pebbles. And finally, in Luxembourg, Grand Duke Henri is an enthusiastic photographer. He takes his camera everywhere, snapping pictures of palace gardens, family gatherings, and the occasional confused tourist. His photo albums are legendary for their sheer volume, hundreds of pages of carefully labelled snapshots, each one capturing a moment of royal tranquility. Family members have learned to pose on command, smiling serenely as the Grand Duke adjusts his lens for the perfect shot. So as you drift off tonight, imagine a world where kings and queens spend their days tending orchids, rearranging model trains, and debating the merits of modern plumbing. History, it turns out, is full of gentle surprises, and sometimes the most boring hobbies are the ones that make royalty truly relatable. Let's wander further into the quietly peculiar world of royal pastimes, where excitement is measured by the number of petals on a rare flower or the perfect alignment of a model train track. In Greece, King Paul had a particular fondness for collecting seashells. His private beach walks were legendary for their slow pace and intense concentration as he scoured the sand for the tiniest, most unusual shells. The royal collection eventually filled several glass cabinets, each shell carefully labelled and occasionally dusted by a very patient palace maid. Guests were sometimes treated to guided tours where the king would point out his favourites with the enthusiasm of a child showing off marbles. Meanwhile, in Romania, Queen Marie was an avid letter writer. She penned thousands of letters to friends, diplomats, and distant relatives, often describing the weather, her latest embroidery project, or the state of the palace gardens. Her correspondence was so prolific that the royal post office had to hire extra staff just to keep up. The Queen's letters are now a treasure trove for historians and a cautionary tale for anyone considering a pen-pal relationship with royalty. Over in Belgium, Queen Fabiola took up the gentle art of writing fairy tales. Her stories filled with talking animals and enchanted forests were published in beautifully illustrated books and read aloud at royal gatherings. The royal grandchildren were her most devoted fans, though the palace staff sometimes suspected the dragons and princesses were thinly veiled versions of actual courtiers. And the wicked witch who always misplaced the silverware was never seen again. Back in England, Prince Philip developed a passion for carriage driving. Not racing, mind you, just the slow, stately kind where you guide a horse-drawn carriage through the countryside at a very dignified pace. The prince would spend hours polishing harnesses and practicing his turns occasionally, offering rides to visiting dignitaries who had to pretend they weren't terrified of horses. The royal stables became a hub of quiet activity, with grooms and footmen competing to see who could shine a bridle to the highest royal standard. In Norway, Queen Sonja is a dedicated hiker and landscape photographer. She loves nothing more than wandering the misty mountains, camera in hand, searching for the perfect shot of a fjord or a patch of wildflowers. Her photo albums are filled with serene vistas and the occasional blurry reindeer, and her gentle enthusiasm has inspired generations of Norwegians to lace up their boots and head for the hills. Meanwhile, in Spain, King Juan Carlos had a long-standing interest in sailing model boats. He would spend hours on the palace pond carefully maneuvering tiny yachts with a remote control, while palace staff watched from the shade and placed friendly bets on which boat would reach the far side first. The king's competitive spirit sometimes got the better of him, leading to heated debates about wind direction and the merits of different hull designs. Let's not forget Princess Grace of Monaco, who after a career in Hollywood found peace in flower arranging. Her bouquets became the talk of the principality, with each arrangement more elaborate than the last. Royal visitors were often sent home with a carefully crafted bouquet and a handwritten note about the symbolism of each flower. The yellow rose represents friendship and the daisy, well, it's just cheerful, isn't it? In Denmark, Prince Henrik took up winemaking. He planted vineyards at the royal summer residence and spent years perfecting his blend. Royal banquets often featured the prince's latest vintage, served with much ceremony and polite applause. The wine was unique, and guests learned to sip slowly and praise the complex bouquet, regardless of what their taste buds were telling them. Back in Sweden, Princess Madeleine is known for her love of baking. The royal kitchens are frequently filled with the aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon buns, and the princess is famous for her elaborate gingerbread houses at Christmas. Palace staff eagerly volunteer as taste testers, and the annual Royal Bake-Off has become a beloved, if slightly competitive, tradition. And finally, in Liechtenstein, Prince Hans Adam II enjoys collecting antique maps. His private study is lined with ancient charts and atlases, each one lovingly restored and displayed. The prince can spend hours tracing the faded lines of old borders and imagining the journeys of explorers long gone. Visitors are sometimes treated to impromptu geography lessons, complete with tales of lost kingdoms and mythical mountains. So, as the royal sun sets on another day of seashell collecting, letter writing and gentle carriage rides, it's clear that boredom is truly a royal tradition. If you ever find yourself drifting off while organizing your sock drawer or rearranging your bookshelf, just remember you're in illustrious company. And so the parade of royal hobbies continues, each more quietly charming than the last. In the Czech lands, Emperor Charles IV was a devoted fish pond enthusiast. He designed elaborate systems of ponds and canals, spending hours watching carp glide lazily through the water. The royal court would occasionally be summoned to admire a particularly plump fish, or witness the ceremonial feeding, which mostly involved tossing breadcrumbs and making polite conversation about water clarity. Meanwhile, in Hungary, Queen Elizabeth, better known as Sisi, took up the art of collecting fans. Not the enthusiastic humankind, but the delicate hand-painted folding fans that were all the rage in 19th century Europe. Her collection grew to hundreds each one, with a story, a secret compartment, or a tiny painted scene. Palace guests were sometimes treated to impromptu fan exhibitions where the Queen would narrate the history of a particularly ornate fan, while everyone else tried not to yawn. In Scotland, Queen Victoria found solace in sketching the misty landscapes around Balmoral Castle. Her sketchbooks overflowed with gentle hills, placid lochs, and the occasional sheep that looked suspiciously like a potato. The royal family would gather for evening art shows, where Victoria would display her latest masterpieces, and everyone would murmur approvingly, regardless of whether they could tell which way was up. Over in Italy, King Umberto V developed a fascination with collecting walking sticks. His collection filled entire rooms, ranging from simple wooden staffs to elaborate canes topped with silver animal heads. He would often stroll through the palace, carefully selecting the perfect stick for the day, and occasionally lending one to a favoured courtier. The annual walking stick parade became a quirky tradition, with courtiers showing off their own decorated canes in a gentle competition for the king's approval. Back in France, Empress Eugénie had a passion for miniature furniture. Her private chambers were filled with tiny chairs, tables and wardrobes, each crafted with exquisite detail. She would spend hours arranging and rearranging her miniature rooms, sometimes inviting close friends to tea parties with dolls as honoured guests. The palace staff learned to step carefully lest they accidentally sit on a priceless tiny sofa. In Finland, King Gustav V was a dedicated stamp collector, rivaling his British counterparts. His collection was so vast that it required a special vault, and he would spend quiet evenings sorting, cataloguing, and occasionally swapping stamps with other royal enthusiasts. The annual royal stamp swap became a highlight of the Nordic social calendar, with kings and queens exchanging rare issues and polite compliments. Meanwhile, in Luxembourg, Grand Duchess Charlotte enjoyed the calming art of weaving. Her tapestries featuring gentle landscapes and abstract patterns adorned the palace walls and were often given as gifts to visiting dignitaries. The Grand Duchess found weaving so relaxing that she sometimes nodded off at her loom, waking up to find she'd woven her glasses into the latest masterpiece. In Poland, King Stanisław August Poniatowski was an avid chess player. He would host marathon chess matches in the palace, sometimes lasting days, with courtiers taking turns as his opponents. The king was known for his slow, deliberate moves and his habit of narrating each game as if it were a grand battle. Spectators would gather quietly, placing bets on how many moves it would take before the king's opponent accidentally lost. Back in Portugal, Queen Amélie loved collecting seashells and pebbles during her walks along the coast. Her collection grew to fill several display cases, each shell and stone carefully labelled with the date and location of its discovery. The Queen would occasionally host shell viewing afternoons where guests were encouraged to admire her latest finds and guess which beach they came from. And finally, in Serbia, King Peter I took up the gentle hobby of gardening. He could often be found tending to his roses, pruning bushes, and chatting with the palace gardeners about soil acidity and fertilizer. The royal gardens became his sanctuary, a place where politics faded away, and the only pressing matter was whether the tulips would bloom before the next state visit. So, as the gentle hum of royal life continues, filled with fish ponds, walking sticks and seashells, it's clear that even the grandest of monarchs found comfort in the simplest pleasures. If you ever worry that your own hobbies are too dull, just remember that somewhere in history, a king was probably doing the exact same thing, only with a bit more ceremony. The journey through the world's most boring royal hobbies just keeps getting cozier. In Sweden, Queen Sylvia has a gentle passion for jigsaw puzzles. She's known to spend entire rainy afternoons piecing together sprawling landscapes or portraits of royal ancestors, sometimes inviting the grandkids to help. Though palace legend has it that anyone who loses a piece is banished from the puzzle table for a week. The royal staff has developed a sixth sense for spotting stray puzzle pieces in the carpets and under the sofa cushions. Meanwhile, in Jordan, Queen Noor found relaxation in birdwatching. Armed with binoculars and a well-thumbed field guide, she would sit quietly in the palace gardens, waiting for a flash of colour or a distinctive birdsong. Her logbooks are filled with meticulous notes about every sighting from the common sparrow to the elusive hoopoe. Visiting diplomats were sometimes invited to join her, though few could match her patience for waiting out a particularly shy finch. Back in England, King Edward VII had a fondness for collecting matchbooks. Not the kind you'd find in a modern bar, but ornate hand-painted match safes from across Europe. His collection was displayed in glass cases, and he delighted in telling the story behind each one, even if the stories grew a little more dramatic with each telling. Royal guests soon learned that complimenting a particularly shiny match safe was a sure way to win the king's favour. Across the sea in Denmark, Queen Ingrid enjoyed the tranquil art of pressing flowers. Her albums are legendary, filled with delicate blooms collected from royal gardens, mountain meadows, and even roadside ditches. Each flower is carefully labelled with the date and location, and the Queen's gentle handwriting fills the margins with notes about the weather and the company she kept that day. The albums are now treasured family heirlooms, occasionally brought out for a nostalgic flip-through on rainy afternoons. In Morocco, King Hassan II was a dedicated model airplane builder. His study was filled with tiny aircraft in various stages of completion, and he was known to spend hours painting insignias and gluing on minuscule propellers. The palace had a special room just for test flights where the king would launch his creations and watch them circle the ceiling, sometimes with a royal cat in hot pursuit. Meanwhile, in Belgium, King Baudouin took up the gentle hobby of stamp engraving. He designed several commemorative stamps himself, delighting in the slow, careful process of sketching, etching, and approving proofs. The Belgian Postal Service still proudly displays his handiwork, and philatelists across the country treasure the royal issue stamps as lucky collectibles. In Spain, Queen Letizia finds peace in knitting. She's known for her intricate scarves and hats, which she donates to charity or gifts to friends and family. The Royal Knitting Circle meets every Thursday, and the palace is filled with the soft click of needles and the gentle hum of conversation. The Queen's patterns are a closely guarded secret passed down from one generation to the next. Over in the Netherlands, Princess Beatrix has a soft spot for pottery painting. Her shelves are lined with colourful vases, plates and mugs, each one featuring a unique design, sometimes a royal crest, sometimes just a cheerful tulip. She often invites local artists to join her, turning the palace studio into a lively paint-splattered workshop. In Thailand, Queen Sirikit is an expert at silk embroidery. Her creations are displayed at the royal palace and in museums, admired for their exquisite detail and vibrant colours. She often hosts embroidery workshops for young people, passing on the tradition and encouraging patience, creativity and a steady hand. And finally, in Monaco, Prince Albert II enjoys collecting vintage postcards. His collection spans the globe and several centuries, with each card carefully catalogued and stored in climate-controlled albums. He loves to share his favourite finds with visitors, spinning tales about the places and people captured in sepia tones and faded ink. So, as you drift further into the land of Nod, imagine the world's royals quietly puzzling, birdwatching and pressing flowers, proving that sometimes the most ordinary hobbies are the ones that truly make history feel human. And the gentle parade of royal pastimes marches on, each hobby more soothing than the last. In Austria, Empress Maria Theresa found peace in the meticulous art of lace-making. She would spend hours hunched over delicate threads, crafting intricate patterns that would later adorn royal gowns and altar cloths. Her lacework became so prized that foreign dignitaries would request samples as diplomatic gifts, and the Empress's personal collection was guarded with almost as much care as the crown jewels. Meanwhile, in Japan, Emperor Taisho had a quiet obsession with calligraphy. He practiced daily, filling scroll after scroll with elegant brushstrokes and ancient poems. The palace halls echoed with the soft swish of ink on rice paper, and the emperor's favourite works were displayed in private galleries for the admiration of close friends and family. It's said that he once spent an entire afternoon perfecting a single character, only to decide the next day that it looked better upside down. Back in Britain, Queen Elizabeth. The Queen Mother enjoyed the gentle sport of lawn bowls. She hosted regular matches on the palace green, inviting friends, family, and the occasional bewildered diplomat to join in. The games were slow, the competition friendly, and the tea breaks frequent. The Queen Mother's favourite trophy was a slightly dented silver bowl, awarded for most consistent delivery, which she displayed with pride in her sitting room. In Norway, King Olav V developed a fondness for stamp design. He would sketch out ideas for new Norwegian stamps, sometimes featuring local wildlife or famous fjords. The king's designs were occasionally adopted by the National Postal Service, much to the delight of collectors. He was known to carry a pocket notebook for sudden bursts of inspiration, and palace staff sometimes found tiny sketches of moose or codfish tucked into royal correspondence. Meanwhile, in Belgium, Queen Paola took up the art of watercolour painting. Her favourite subjects were the palace gardens and the changing Belgian skies, and her gentle brushwork captured the soft mists and golden sunsets of her homeland. Her paintings were often given as gifts to friends and visiting dignitaries, who would marvel at the Queen's ability to make even a cabbage patch look regal. In Greece, Queen Frederica was a passionate amateur astronomer. She spent many evenings on the palace balcony, peering through her telescope and charting the stars. She kept detailed logs of meteor showers and lunar eclipses, and her enthusiasm inspired several royal stargazing parties, complete with midnight snacks and cosy blankets. The Queen's favourite constellation was Cassiopeia, which she insisted looked just like her favourite armchair. Back in Spain, King Felipe VI enjoys the slow, satisfying art of bonsai tree cultivation. His private greenhouse is filled with miniature pines, maples and flowering cherries, each one lovingly pruned and shaped over the years. The king finds the process meditative, and palace staff have learned to tiptoe around the bonsai room lest they disturb a particularly delicate branch. In Denmark, Crown Princess Mary has a passion for cross-stitch. Her colourful samplers decorate the palace walls, often featuring Danish proverbs or cheerful scenes from royal life. She sometimes hosts cross-stitch afternoons for friends and family, where conversation flows as freely as the embroidery floss. The princess's favourite project is a massive, ever-growing tapestry depicting the royal family's adventures, complete with tiny stitched corgis and sailboats. Meanwhile, in Bhutan, Queen Jetsun Pema is a skilled papermaker. She crafts beautiful handmade paper from local plants which she uses for royal correspondence and special gifts. Her workshop is filled with the scent of fresh pulp and drying sheets, and the Queen often invites local children to learn the traditional craft. Her paper is prized for its softness and subtle patterns, and her letters are a delight to receive. And finally, in Italy, Queen Margherita was known for her love of collecting buttons. Her button boxes overflowed with treasures from every corner of the kingdom: mother of pearl, carved wood, painted porcelain, and even the occasional gold-plated oddity. She would spend rainy afternoons sorting and arranging her collection, sometimes inviting friends to guess the story behind a particularly unusual button. So as the royal world quietly stitches sketches and sorts, it's clear that the most ordinary hobbies can bring extraordinary comfort even to those who wear a crown. If you ever find yourself lost in a gentle pastime, just remember somewhere a royal is probably doing the same with a cup of tea and a contented sigh. Let's keep meandering through the palace corridors of gentle distraction, where even the grandest monarchs find joy in the simplest things. In the heart of Spain, Queen Sofia has a soft spot for scrapbooking. Her shelves are lined with albums filled with ticket stubs, pressed flowers, and carefully captioned photos from royal events, family picnics, and even the occasional blurry snapshot of a palace cat. She's known to spend hours arranging each page, choosing the perfect stickers and coloured paper, and sometimes adding a handwritten note about the weather or a particularly memorable slice of cake. Meanwhile, in Norway, Crown Prince Haakon finds peace in fly fishing. He'll rise early, don his waders, and head to a secluded riverbank with a thermos of coffee and a box of hand-tied flies. The royal catch is rarely impressive. Palace chefs have learned not to expect trout for dinner, but the prince insists it's the quiet waiting and the sound of the water that he loves most. Sometimes he'll return to the palace with nothing but a story about the one that got away. Back in the Netherlands, Queen Maxima enjoys the soothing art of flower arranging. Her vibrant bouquets brighten every royal room, and she's been known to host friendly competitions among the palace staff who can create the most cheerful centerpiece using only what's blooming in the garden that day. The Queen's arrangements are sometimes so elaborate that visiting dignitaries have been caught peering behind vases, convinced there must be a hidden support structure. In Belgium, King Philippe has a fondness for Sudoku puzzles. He tackles them with the seriousness of a state matter pencil in hand and brow furrowed. The royal breakfast table is often scattered with half-finished puzzles, and palace aides have learned to wait until the king fills the final square before discussing anything more complicated than the weather. Legend has it that a particularly tricky puzzle once delayed a cabinet meeting by 20 minutes. Over in Denmark, Prince Joachim loves model shipbuilding. His study is lined with meticulously crafted replicas of historic Danish vessels, each one painted and rigged with painstaking attention to detail. The prince often invites his children to help, though the youngest is mostly interested in launching the ships across the floor. The annual Royal Regatta, a race of model ships in the palace fountain, has become a beloved family tradition, even if a few boats inevitably capsize. In Sweden, Princess Estelle has taken up rock painting. The palace gardens are dotted with cheerful stones painted with smiling faces, flowers, and the occasional royal crown. Visiting children are encouraged to join in, and the princess proudly displays her favourites on a special shelf in her room. The royal gardeners have learned to check the flower beds carefully before mowing, just in case a masterpiece is hiding among the daisies. Meanwhile, in Luxembourg, Grand Duchess Maria Theresa enjoys the art of calligraphy. She practices her flourishes on royal invitations menus and thank you notes, turning even the simplest message into a work of art. The Duchess sometimes hosts calligraphy workshops for local students who leave with ink-stained fingers and a new appreciation for the beauty of a well-formed letter. Back in Britain, Prince Edward is known for his love of model railways. His private collection features tiny trains chugging through miniature English villages, complete with sheep pubs and the occasional royal carriage. The prince finds the rhythmic clatter of the trains soothing, and he's always on the lookout for a new piece of track or a particularly realistic model tree. In Monaco, Princess Caroline has a passion for gardening, especially growing herbs. Her kitchen windowsill is filled with pots of basil, mint and rosemary, and she enjoys experimenting with new recipes using her homegrown bounty. The palace chef has learned to expect a steady supply of fresh herbs and the occasional suggestion for a new dish from the princess herself.
And finally, in Liechtenstein, Prince Alois finds relaxation in origami. His office is decorated with delicate paper cranes, frogs, and even the occasional dragon, each one folded during quiet moments between meetings. The prince sometimes leaves a paper animal on the desk of a palace staffer as a gentle surprise, and his origami workshops are a favourite among the royal children.
So as the sun sets on another tranquil day in the world's palaces, it's clear that even the most powerful people find comfort in the slow, satisfying rhythm of a quiet hobby. If you ever feel your own pastimes are a little dull, just remember you're sharing in a royal tradition of peaceful, delightful boredom. And the gentle tapestry of royal hobbies keeps growing stitch by soothing stitch. In Portugal, Queen Maria, I was known for her devotion to embroidery. She could spend entire afternoons by a sunlit window needle in hand, creating delicate floral patterns on handkerchiefs and tablecloths. Her work was so admired that foreign courts would send special requests for a piece of royal embroidery, and the Queen's favourite threads were guarded like state secrets. It's said that she once embroidered an entire table runner just to commemorate a particularly lovely spring day. Meanwhile, in Sweden, King Carl XVI, Gustav enjoys mushroom foraging. Every autumn he heads into the forests with a basket and a well-worn field guide, searching for the perfect chanterelle or porcini. The royal kitchen eagerly awaits his return, though the king is just as happy to come back with stories of elusive mushrooms that slipped away. He insists that the best part is the quiet of the woods and the thrill of spotting a rare specimen among the leaves. Back in Belgium, Queen Matilda finds peace in the art of candle making. Her workshop is filled with scents of lavender, beeswax and vanilla, and her candles, often shaped like flowers or tiny animals, are given as gifts to friends, family and visiting dignitaries. The Queen enjoys experimenting with new molds and fragrances, and the palace is always softly lit by her latest creations. In Spain, Princess Leonor has developed a fondness for journaling. She fills notebook after notebook with sketches, thoughts and observations from her daily life. Her journals are decorated with stickers and pressed flowers, and she sometimes reads her favourite entries to her family over breakfast. The princess says it helps her remember the small joys of royal life, like the taste of fresh oranges or the sound of rain on the palace roof. Meanwhile, in Denmark, Prince Christian is a budding amateur astronomer. On clear nights, he sets up his telescope in the palace garden and charts the stars, planets, and the occasional passing satellite. The prince keeps a log of his sightings and sometimes invites friends for impromptu stargazing parties, complete with hot chocolate and whispered stories about the constellations. In the Netherlands, Queen Maxima has taken up knitting. She's known for her colourful scarves and hats, which she donates to charity or gives as gifts to palace staff. The Queen's knitting circle meets regularly, and the palace is filled with laughter, the click of needles, and the occasional friendly debate over the best way to purl. Over in Norway, Princess Märtha Louise enjoys pottery. Her studio is filled with bowls, mugs and vases in every imaginable shape and colour. The princess finds the process meditative, and her creations are proudly displayed throughout the palace. Visitors are often gifted a handmade mug or bowl, each one unique and stamped with the royal crest. Back in Britain, Prince William has a quiet love for gardening, especially growing vegetables. His greenhouse is filled with tomatoes, cucumbers and beans, and he enjoys spending weekends tending to his plants with his children. The royal family's homegrown produce often makes its way to the dinner table, and the prince is known to boast about his particularly plump tomatoes. In Monaco, Princess Stephanie finds joy in collecting vintage perfume bottles. Her collection, displayed in glass cabinets, features bottles from every era, some shaped like flowers, others like tiny works of art. The princess loves researching the history behind each bottle, imagining the glamorous parties and royal balls where they might once have been used. And finally, in Luxembourg, Prince Felix enjoys woodworking. His workshop is filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood and the gentle hum of tools. The prince crafts everything from picture frames to small furniture, and his handmade gifts are treasured by family and friends. He says the best part is watching a simple block of wood transform into something beautiful and useful. So as the royal world winds down with embroidery, candles and stargazing, it's clear that the quietest hobbies can bring the most lasting joy. If you find yourself content with a simple pastime, you're in excellent regal company. And so we reach the final gentle chapter in our royal journey, where the hobbies are as soothing as a lullaby and just as likely to send you drifting off to sleep. In Hungary, Queen Geraldine loved the art of letterpress printing. Her study was filled with little drawers of tight, colourful inks and stacks of thick paper. She'd spend hours arranging letters to print invitations, menus, and the occasional royal poem. Each press of the handle brought a satisfying clunk, and the results were always admired, even if the ink sometimes ended up on her nose. Meanwhile, in Denmark, Princess Benedicta enjoys the quiet craft of beadwork. Her creations, delicate necklaces, bracelets, and sparkling brooches are worn at family gatherings and sometimes gifted to friends. The princess finds the repetitive motion calming, and palace staff have been known to find stray beads glittering in the carpet long after a creative session. In Spain, King Juan Carlos, after a busy reign, found peace in watercolor painting. He prefers gentle landscapes and seascapes with soft colors and wide skies. His paintings hang in private corridors of the palace, and family members have their favorites, especially the one with the slightly crooked lighthouse that everyone agrees has character. Over in Sweden, Queen Sylvia has a fondness for crossword puzzles. She'll settle into her favourite chair with a cup of tea and a sharpened pencil, tackling the trickiest clues with royal determination. Family members sometimes try to help, but the Queen is known for her competitive streak and insists on filling every square herself. Back in Belgium, Princess Elizabeth finds joy in paper quilling. She rolls and shapes strips of coloured paper into flowers, animals, and intricate patterns, creating cheerful cards and decorations for the palace. The princess says she loves watching a flat piece of paper transform into something three-dimensional and beautiful, a little like royal life itself. In the Netherlands, King Willem-Alexander enjoys the art of cheese making. He experiments with different recipes and ages his creations in a special cellar. The royal family's cheese tastings are legendary, with everyone offering polite but honest opinions. The king is especially proud of his Gouda, which he claims pairs perfectly with a sunny afternoon and a good book. Meanwhile, in Norway, Queen Sonja has taken up hiking sketching. She brings a small notebook on her mountain walks, stopping to draw wildflowers, waterfalls, and the occasional sheep. Her sketches are simple but full of life, and the Queen says they help her remember the peace of the high country, even on busy days. In Monaco, Prince Jacques is a budding seashell collector, following in the footsteps of royal hobbyists before him. He and his sister Gabriella spend hours combing the beach searching for the perfect shell to add to their growing collection. The palace now boasts a shell shelf where each new find is displayed with a handwritten label and a story about its discovery. Back in Britain, Princess Anne is known for her love of Sudoku. She tackles the daily puzzles with the same determination she brings to her royal duties, sometimes racing against the clock for a personal best. The palace staff have learned that it's best not to interrupt the princess mid-puzzle unless there's a genuine royal emergency or tea. And finally, in Luxembourg, Princess Alexandra finds calm in the ancient art of origami. Her delicate paper cranes, lilies and butterflies decorate her rooms, and she often folds a new creation before important meetings or family gatherings. The princess says that with each fold, she feels a little more centered, a little more ready for whatever the day may bring. So, as the last royal hobbyist sets aside her paper, her knitting, her puzzle, or her paintbrush, the palace grows quiet. The world's most powerful families find peace in the same gentle pastimes as the rest of us, proof that sometimes the simplest joys are the most regal of all. If you're feeling sleepy now, you're not alone. History's kings and queens would surely approve of a good nap after a long day of hobbies. Sweet dreams, and may your next hobby be as delightfully boring as royal history itself.